Hello, Vinny. Thank you so much for inviting me. We are going to spend some time today, 20 minutes maybe, to describe who we are. We are a slightly different analyst firms, and our purpose is to help AR folks understand what we offer. So, Vinny, that's over to you, I guess.
Great, Sam. Good to see you. We see each other quite often recently. So
I
nice
know
to
we are
see you
running in the
again.
same circles.
Yep. Look forward to this.
Okay. So would you like me to share the screen and share the slides, or how would you like me to proceed?
However you want to do. Yeah. Share your
Okay, perfect. Okay, so Vinny, I have some slides for you. So here I'm actually going to move to the next one. So overall, Vinny, I think we had, our conversation recently as well on our podcast, where we were discussing different problems, and I think you relate with this as well. So overall, I guess I would like to talk a little bit about my background, where I come from, and that might help your audience understand this story a little bit better. So just like you, I grew up in the consulting world, and I was doing very large software, enterprise software implementations. And overall, we have seen the good, bad, and ugly of the whole enterprise software world, including some of the failures that the enterprise software industry is known for. And after doing this for many years, we were wondering, okay, what's going on? What are different trends that we might be able to analyze? And that's where we sort of felt that this is frustrating process for pretty much everyone. It's going to be for customers, it is for vendors, because they are not necessarily getting what they want, from the software. So we wanted to go back and analyze and figure out what's going on. So we did a little study and found that, there were problems everywhere. And that was the genesis of ElevatIQ. So it's slightly different analyst firm, the way we work, but still an analyst firm. So a couple of problems, I guess, we need that you might be able to relate. And I think we discussed this as well. And I think you agree with this. So for example, let's say if you look at the majority of the analyst firms, the way they work is their quadrants are structured this whole notion of race to the right. Now, this is great, but it does not necessarily help the emerging vendors. It does not help. There's this mindset that, what, if you are going to have these enterprise features, then you are probably going to be good for the customers. Now, we work very closely with the buyers. Buyers look at it from different lenses, especially when you look at the implementation adoption, then the target market segment matters. So each of the target market segment is going to have very specific need, and the product design needs to support that. So we are sort of, doing it slightly different, but I think you agree with this particular problem. The other problem we have seen with the majority of the analyst firms, and I don't know, some companies have changed this. For example, Forrester has started including some of the industry variables as part of their analysis. I don't know if we have seen with anybody else, but the analyst firms are picking on that the industry variables as well as the correlation matters. So that is the second problem that we have, that, okay, if you are selling a horizontal offering to an horizontal department, such as IT, then this is going to work okay. But when you go to the LOBs, generally from their perspective, they look for deeper industry correlation with the software offerings. They are looking to see, okay, what have you done in my micro industry? Can you speak my language? So that is going to be their preference. Overall, when we look at the buyer cycle, in our case, sometimes we act as the buyer as well, because we have much deeper involvement during the procurement process. So from our perspective, from the buyer's perspective, the needs of the buyers are not necessarily represented in the majority of the analysis and the research report that we generally see in the market. So that is the third problem. And then obviously the adoption is a very different variable. So yes, a lot of analyst firms are doing a lot of studies, and they generally limit themselves until the implementation phase. But when you look at over the course of time, maybe after 2-3 years, buyers are going to have very different preferences in terms of what they like. And if they don't like something, there is going to be very little word of mouth effect, and referenceability is going to be a challenge, which is what the majority of the software vendors want, and they generally don't get that. So I'm going to take a little pause here. Vinny, I'm pretty sure you're going to have some follow-up questions. I spoke a lot there.
No, I mean especially the industry insights. I think it's a very risky time for enterprise software because most of our stuff tends to be horizontal and SG&A focused, whereas a big need is on the cost of goods sold. If you look at the income statement, right,
Yep.
the revenue side analysis is still there's some. For some industries better than others, but that's missing. And that tends to be very proprietary, right? Because it's product centric and so on. But the cost of goods sold is very operationally different from industry to industry.
Yep.
And there's very little functionality that looks at product, product R&D, all that stuff that is part of operations cost just isn't covered much. And so if the transaction processing isn't covering that, the AI doesn't have data to really come up
Yep.
with, useful
Yep.
use cases and so on. So this has been a 30-year process where they just haven't verticalized. They pretend to verticalize. They
Yep.
talk some language, spray painted, but now it's really starting to bite them because their use cases are still about HR, job descriptions, or still about customer service agents and so on. Important, but not worth the premiums that they expect for them. So, yeah.
Yeah, and to add to your point, I mean, this is the conversation that we were having, from one of our customers, and when they wanted to approach this, they were working with us to develop some of the content pieces that they can utilize, and they were like, okay, let's target discrete manufacturing. Okay, from the ERP perspective in CRM, a similar analysis could be that, okay, I am looking at something like, I don't know, maybe AI agents. Now, from buyer's perspective, the way they like to look at this is discrete manufacturing is great, but buyers don't necessarily understand that. From their perspective, it's going to be something that they can correlate with the industry. For example, if you go to a trade show, and this is the example that I always use, you are never going to find anything called discrete manufacturing, I guess. It's very rare that you will find a trade show for discrete manufacturing. It's going to be something like auto parts manufacturing. It's going to be aerospace manufacturing. It's going to be machinery manufacturing, maybe medical device manufacturing. That's where we call this real world alignment with the content and content pieces. And regardless of the offering that you are offering from the enterprise software perspective, you still need to align that with the industry. And that's how buyers are going to be able to understand what you are able to do for them. So I don't know, Vinny, if that helps a little bit, with the example.
It does, but it's not just manufacturing, right? I
Yeah.
mean, so many edge applications that emerged during COVID because of the Ukraine war, because of climate change, that there are so many new areas that didn't exist 5 years ago. Telemedicine and healthcare,
Yeah.
right? Returns management in e-commerce. 20% of e-commerce is return. You don't want people making manual decisions on should I take it back, where should I stock it, etc. All that should be automated, right? So EV battery management and infrastructure. Utilities are 5 years ago, you couldn't talk to them again. Now everyone is looking at that, right? So there's 100 different new vertical edge
Yeah.
applications that have become relevant. It should be part of ERP, right? Uh, Unfortunately, people are custom developing it or
Yeah.
they're buying from niche providers.
Yeah, could not agree more. So I'm going to, share some more things, and this is another layer that we like to discuss. And this is the problem that we have seen overall in the industry as well. Again, this is more about buyers and what buyers care for. So traditionally, I guess, Winnie, and I'm pretty sure you can relate with this. there were three major players, I would say, and they are tied to the hip. So number one, the analyst firms. Number two is going to be some sort of consulting firms, and number three, technology consulting firms. And they all sort of work together. They influence each other's market, I guess. I don't think any of these players can live without the other. And buyers are probably going to need all of them as well as they evaluate any of the software offerings or any sort of business transformation initiatives. So traditional state of the industry, there were analyst firms, and people talk about this, that when you are working with any of the companies, you need to review their financial alignment, financial compensation. But the issue is going to be slightly bigger than that. It's not just the financial compensation and financial alignment that matters. The issue, in our experience at least, is bigger. So for example, let's say if you look at the example of the analyst firms, for the most part, I mean, they sort of sold the subscription. Again, this far better than I do, I guess. But they are always going to maintain very strict editorial control that is very well known. And I think you discussed this with Robin. You had Robin on your podcast, that you can never control the messaging from the analyst perspective. You can never control the ranking. So that was the traditional state of the industry. The changes have happened somewhere here in this. Okay. So traditionally, you had these strategy consulting firms, McKinsey, Deloitte, KPMG. Traditionally, they did not necessarily have the reseller relationships. And the reseller relationships are slightly different because the OEMs are revealing their IP. So whoever is sort of has access to their IP, they want to treat them as if they are going to be their extended sales arm. And that means that they have to control the sales and marketing messaging, that if I'm giving you access to my product as well as IP, then I want to make sure that my interests are represented the way I like to see them. So initially, I guess, I mean, they were independent. They did not necessarily have any sort of these reseller affiliations, but that changed because most of these companies were not necessarily making money. And we all know that the money is always going to be in implementation. So this was the traditional state where SIs, for the most part, I mean, they were aligned with the majority of the OEMs. They had the reseller partnerships. Editorial control, even with the strategy consulting firms, was fairly agnostic. Traditionally, they did not have these reseller relationships, including the accounting firms as well as the consulting firms. So I don't know if you're going to have any sort of comments here, Vinny, on this.
No, I do see the second line you have here,
Yeah.
becoming more influential at the board level. They still have the ear of the boards, and so in bigger company boards, right? So they've become a lot more influential than they were 5, 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, could not agree more. And I guess, I mean, there is a layer here. So let's say if you are looking at pure play consulting engagement where software is not necessarily involved, some of these strategy consulting firms could be independent. But for the most part, if a software is going to be involved, generally it ends up being more of the compliance with whatever solutions they are carrying in their portfolio, as opposed to very vendor agnostic, the way the traditional state used to work. So now, because of that, I'm going to move to the next slide. Because of that,
The only other point I would make is the analyst firms are no longer just the big firms. Gartner has become a very, very dominant force, but there have also been a number of boutique firms and bloggers and so on.
yeah,
So that's a much more fragmented market, the first line.
could not agree more. Could not agree more, Vinny. Yeah. So I'm going to move to the next one. So this is where I guess, has not been much change from the analyst firm's perspective. Independent analysts are, obviously as part of that bucket as well, as you correctly pointed out. But overall, from the state perspective, there are not much change, from the analyst perspective. The changes have happened here, which is what has created a gap in the market, at least from the buyer's perspective. Okay, so now what these strategy consulting firms started doing is now they all have reseller relationships, even the likes of McKinsey. They all have that. Obviously, I mean, everybody's going to say that everybody's kind of independent, which has become a buzzword, I guess. But underneath, these companies have reseller relationships, and that's where buyers know this. Buyers know this in their heart that they have reseller relationship. So for the most part, they are going to be directed to the ones that they are going to have in their portfolio. Now, if you think this more from the buyer's perspective, what they need, and their needs have been similar. Okay, they need somebody who can help them through the entire procurement process. And generally, when you look at complex enterprise software offerings, ERP, CRM, ACM, EAM, anything and everything that goes in the enterprise architecture, they need a little bit more hand holding because they are not going to have the same subject matter expertise as your analyst or consulting firms are going to have. So now if you go to analyst firms and they do an amazing job, right? But their scope is going to be limited to either selling subscription framework. They have started doing some custom consulting, but they don't necessarily get into the real requirement analysis, the real critical success factor, designing the RFPs, making sure buyer is educated in terms of the deeper critical success factors. And that's where a lot of different independent firms, and I don't know, Vinny, if you get into that kind of area or not, but that's where a lot of these buy-side analyst firms are filling that gap because buyers need that, for them to be informed. Otherwise, they struggle with it.
Interestingly, in the services side, systems integration projects and outsourcing, there have been a lot more advisory firms. The analyst firms, like you say, don't get involved in helping them build the RFPs and so on. Advisory firms have done a lot more of that, and the negotiations too. So in software, it's still the analyst firm is influential.
Yeah, could not agree more. I mean, there are always layers to, what is analyst, what is consulting, what is advisory, but depending upon the scope, right? For the most part, if you look at the big four analyst firms, they are not necessarily going to get into the real, contract negotiation, the change management, the procurement, probably the independent advisors. So now I think the point that you are trying to make is they have a lot more influence on the buying process than any quadrant out there, I guess. Is that fair assessment of what you were trying to say?
No.
Okay, so please tell me.
Sorry?
Please tell me. Okay, then please tell me, please clarify, okay, where I missed your point.
You didn't. I was just adding to your point that the analyst firms are very good at responding to specific questions rather than helping people put RFPs together. Custom advice is a lot tougher with the bigger analyst firms.
Exactly, could not agree more. I think we are aligned. So I'll move to the next slide, if you're okay with that, unless you have any other.
Yep.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I guess our research, the way we look at research is slightly different. So obviously, we have a lot to offer for the enterprise software vendors as well. And this is what we have been thinking about. So again, if you look at this more from the buyer perspective, sure, this whole idea of custom consulting is great, but at the same time, not every company out there can necessarily afford, $50,000, $60,000, $80,000 selection engagement. So we have been thinking about, okay, what
Sam,
can
you may want to have different colors for this. Doesn't show as well on a white background.
Yeah, feedback
okay,
well
now.
taken. Yeah, we'll take care of that, Vinny. But I mean, right now, I don't think we can change that,
no,
right?
that's fine.
Yeah. So I mean, it might be harder to see, but yeah, we'll definitely take care of that. But for the most part, I guess the point that I was trying to make is when you look at our research, okay, it is very well influenced by the buying cycle. We are very deeply involved, from the buyer perspective. And if you look at the state of buyers, not every company out there can afford a custom consulting help. So what we have done is we have sort of reverse engineered whatever we learned from the buyer cycle perspective and trying to incorporate those insights into our quadrants, as well as we have awards that we are trying to position. And our goal is going to be to maintain the same level of trust that we have during our custom selection consulting process. So that's the intent of these quadrants. So let's say if AR teams or the vendors want to utilize that, we have several offerings from their perspective as well, the way other analyst firms are going to have. But obviously, the analysis is very different. The representation is very different. So for the most part, the way we structure this is, there are four different market segments. So size is a very important factor for us. So the point related to race to the right, that is not necessarily applicable to us. Okay, what we recommend is in any of the quadrant or any of the areas of the quadrant, wherever you are as a buyer, as a company, you should be looking at the leading solutions from that area as opposed to looking at only the solutions that are going to be towards the right. And that creates sort of the fair representation for the software vendors as well. So in our case, I mean, we have four different market segments: the startup, the small, mid, and enterprise. So in our experience, each of these market segments have very different needs, the way they think, the kind of skill set they are going to have, where they are going to be successful with the product, and the product design cannot cover all of these market segments equally well. So the market segments matter from the buyer perspective as well as from the enterprise software vendors perspective as well. Sometimes they might overcommit that, I can cover all of these areas equally well, but in our experience, that is very rare. So generally we tell them that, you can probably cover two, maybe startup small, maybe small and mid, maybe mid and enterprise, but it's going to be a stretch if you are trying to target, all of them all together. So that's the overarching intent of our quadrant as well as research. So I know that it's harder to follow just because the quadrants are busy, I guess. So I don't know, Vinny, if you have any sort of comments there.
No, I mean, clearly size to you is much more important. Um, I mean, there are so many different ways you can segment the market, right? I'm much more of a region and vertical focused view of the market. Now, it the size is important because in a multinational, they look for all kinds of
Yeah,
countries and they can go cross industry and so on. Smaller businesses tend to be much more focused. So, they're much more uh, they want vendors who are much more focused. They don't want to deal with SAP or Oracle as much. They want to deal with smaller firms who can, pricing wise and um, in terms of even expectations of data center size and so on, very
yeah.
different mindset. So I understand why you focus on as much on size of enterprise.
Yeah, so I think I'm reading your mind. So the next thing that we are going to have is the micro industry. And the micro industry is a big factor for us as well, as part of our analysis. And we go very, 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 very deep. And again, this is not only applicable for ERP-like offerings. In our experience, this is going to be relevant even for very horizontal offering. Even if you are talking about top line versus bottom line,
Sure.
CRM offerings, sometimes, companies might say that for CRM, it doesn't matter. It's the sales cycle, but the sales cycles are going to be very different. The customer journeys are going to be very different when you go from your insurance to healthcare to your financial services to your, healthcare insurance. These are completely, completely different verticals. They are going to have very different customer persona. They are going to have very different hierarchy of the data models, and that all drive whether you are going to be successful with these solutions or not. So we go very deep into that as well.
So two points on that. One is this is where you struggle with vendors. Vendors will talk about, oh yeah, we can do micro verticals. They can't even do high level verticals. So
Exactly.
that's one constraint. The second one is, we talked about my new book. It's a fiction book,
Yeah.
but the vendor there is Polestar. Polestar's definition of verticals is very, very micro in that they go after individual occupations, right?
Yeah.
So they look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 800 occupations, and say, okay, if you're going to go after fire and safety as a vertical, we should look at what a fireman needs. It's not just scheduling software to schedule
Yeah.
fire people,
Yeah.
but you know the right kind of thermal goggles that work in a fire setting, acoustic suppressants for fire control. A lot of unique features
Yep.
which require more than just IT. They require chemical,
Yeah.
physical, a lot of STEM disciplines, right? So they look at each occupation. That to me is a next generation vertical definition. And none of the vendors are thinking that way. But since we're talking about automation and AI, in the end, it comes down to worker productivity is the biggest single driver of
Yeah.
ROI, right? You've
Yeah.
got to think on occupational lines. So
Yep.
just making the point that the definition of micro verticals will change pretty soon.
Yeah, could not agree more. And I think we are trying to align with, what you are saying here. And you are right that micro vertical, micro industry matters, even for the horizontal offerings. Each departments are going to have very unique needs, the kind of language they are going to speak. So if you want to really relate with them, you have to speak their language. And that's exactly what has been our effort. How can we go deeper, but at the same time, not bloat the messaging. How can we be really specific with our messaging that buyers can relate with it? So that's been our focus. So I think we are aligned there in our expectations. So I'll go to the next one. So again, we have also launched our awards and certifications, and the certifications are going to be for each of the micro segments, which is your the size as well as your any of the micro industries that we were talking about. So as soon as customers are going to see any sort of certifications or the certified seal or this award, they have some level of trust that, okay, now I can relate with this. This is going to be medical device. They have done some sort of assessment. Again, this is not supposed to be the replacement of the custom selection process, but this is going to be for the customers who cannot necessarily afford the custom selection process. If they can, obviously, that's probably the best to work with one of the advisors who's doing this on a daily basis. But this is only for the customers who might not have as much budget appetite to be able to do this. So at least they are going to have some level of trust. And this is going to be for the enterprise software vendors as well. If they want to utilize these awards, it is going to help them with their sales and marketing processes. It's going to give them the third-party validation that they need. 90% of the awards that we have in the market, they are fairly vanilla. To be completely honest, in our experience, if you look at any of the award providers, for example, G2 Capterra, literally every software ranks there, and they are going to say, hey, I'm leader in Q2, I guess, of 2025. So again, nothing against those awards, but as such, if you look at them from the buyer's perspective, it does not help much, because from the buyer perspective, what I'm really looking for is, okay, have you done any business in my industry? Okay, can you speak the language of my region? I think that's the point that you had, right? And then are you successful in my target market segment? And those are going to be number three, right? Not number three drivers that are going to be the most common and the most relevant for them. And we are trying to align to that. So I think that's pretty much it from the PowerPoint perspective. So Vinny, unless you want to discuss any
Right.
of
So
this.
walk me through, one buyer client and one vendor client, how you do business with them. So quickly, just talk about that.
Yeah, so let's take the example of both of the customer journeys, right? So number one is going to be the end user client. So they are generally coming to us because they don't necessarily understand, okay, what are all of these categories and how can I align my business goals with these categories? So we help them with the entire the
But
strategy
stop,
process.
stop, stop, stop sharing. So
Okay.
you can, yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So we will help them with the entire strategy process, meaning redefining their business processes, building the target operating model, understanding, okay, which technologies are going to fit them in that. And then depending upon how much help they need from our side, sometimes they are looking for only the business process advisory. Sometimes they are looking for the system selection. Sometimes they are looking for contract negotiation. So that is going to be one side of the offering. And then the second side of the offering we have for the enterprise software vendors, which is going to be similar to the analyst firms. So we are helping them from the media content research perspective, and they can use these awards, reprints, to drive demand for them if they want to use that Then they have the sales and marketing validation as well. This is going to be bottom of the funnel content for the majority of the enterprise software vendors if they want to utilize that. Sometimes they get the questions that, okay, from buyer's perspective, okay, help me understand how you differ from your competitors. Now, if they are simply going to offer their own collateral, that is going to come across as the sales pitch. When you have the third party, meaning us, with the editorially controlled process, then buyers generally relate with that. They have seen ElevatIQ everywhere. So obviously there is a little sense of trust, I would say, and that's the value that most analyst firms, as well as the advisors such as you, add to the process, in my experience.
And tell a little bit about background about your firm. Where is it? How can people reach you? How big are you? Few key facts about yourself.
Yeah. So we are primarily in North America. We have offshore in India as well. So 3 locations right now. We are boutique, so roughly 20 people. We have been in the market for roughly 6 years now, 7 maybe. So that's the length. What else did I miss, Vinny?
And you're based in Toronto, right?
Yes, physically, yes.
Oh, this is good. Thank you for giving us an overview.
Of course,
You know,
Vinny, anytime.
thanks a lot.
Thanks, Vinny, for having me. Really appreciate you.
Absolutely.